Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell from the Unity Center here in beautiful San Diego. Our mission statement is transforming lives and healing our world. Each week, we partner with Spirit to bring that statement to life through our Sunday services, social media, email, and our YouTube channel, and in the work we're doing with our newly created Anti-Racism Institute. Together with our Unity community, we are working to be the change we most want to see in our world. We may find ourselves relating as I did. 1 minute I'm breathing, the next I'm reeling. The realization, too, that the worst may come and the best comes as well. And such is the teaching, a core teaching in Buddhism, right? That the idea of impermanence, that this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And so I think so often in our life experience, we need to remind ourselves of some basic things, some things that never change at their core, even though the circumstances and the conditions around them may change. And what I'm speaking of is certain spiritual practices that help us to be able to be in a state of centeredness, to be in a state of peacefulness, even when the conditions around us seem to be everything else. That's a very deep spiritual practice. And we may not be able to do it perfectly. We may not be able to do it all of the time. But if we know a few key elements of it, and we commit those elements to memory, and we do our very best to practice them, we will find that we're able to move through those really difficult things in our lives in a much, much, much better way. Peace of mind in stressful times. So I said to you that this series for this month is actually one that I've put together in response to what many of you said to me you wanted to hear about. And I'm not sure how to read our numbers, whether you really meant it, that you wanted to hear some things from the Bible from a metaphysical perspective or not. But there is such good wisdom, such practical wisdom that we can pull from the Bible. And whenever I hear people say, and I have some in my family who believe very differently than I do, who would say that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, that it is literal, it is infallible, I go nuts inside. And I do because I can think of so many things in the Bible where I say, if you took them literally and you acted upon them literally, you'd be thrown in jail. You know, there are verses in the Bible that speak to the idea that you should be baptized by fire. Do you know anyone who's being baptized that way? No. There are verses in the Bible that say the women must remain silent in the churches. In a state like California, you wouldn't be able to implement that, right? What about our First Amendment right? So, you know, it's not a black or white thing. But as I've said before, it's not particularly helpful to throw the baby out with the bathwater when there could be some good stuff in there as well. And so we're going to be unpacking the metaphysics of the story of Noah and the ark. Raise your hand if you remember it. Any part of the story of Noah and the ark. Okay, that's most of us. And you might have a visual of days in Sunday school. Maybe you even had to draw the ark and all of the animals and stuff like that. But to refresh your memory, Noah and the ark, or Noah and the flood. So we're told that Jehovah, that God has many names, different names in the Old Testament, saw that the wickedness of man was tremendous, was great all across the face of the earth, and that the imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. Can you get a picture of that? I mean, pretty vivid, right? All over the earth. The imaginations of man's heart was only evil continually, and that there was only one man who was found righteous in all the world. And what was his name? Noah. And God said that Noah was righteous. Noah walked with God. That Noah, this is allegorical, okay? This is not historical. That Noah walked with God, and Noah found favor in God's sight. And so God was upset, we're told. Sounds very human to me, with what he was seeing going on all around, and decided he was going to wipe out everybody but save Noah and Noah's family. And he was going to wipe out everybody how? With a flood, with the rain. It was going to rain for how long? 40 days and 40 nights. And so God told Noah that this is what's going to happen, and told Noah to go build an ark. And so Noah built this ark, and it was to put his 3 sons and their wives in the ark, and 2 of what? Every animal, male and female, every animal in the ark for 40 days and 40 nights. And then it was going to rain for those 40 days or 40 nights. And in fact, it certainly did, according to the story. And interestingly, this flood story, it appears in other texts and other cultures as well. So historians and archaeologists believe that there may have actually been a prolonged flood during that period of history. Anyway, whether it was literal or not, we have the story of Noah being instructed by God, going to wipe out everybody, but you guys are okay because you walk with me, you are righteous. And so it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. And when finally the rain subsides, the ark finds its way, it rests on Mount Ararat. No more rain. We're told that Noah takes the covering of the ark off and sends out a dove to see if the dove comes back or not. And he sends that dove out. He has to do it 3 times because the dove keeps coming back because there's not enough dry land. And eventually the dove does not come back anymore. And Noah knows, we're safe now. So there's some really great archetypical and metaphysical elements in this story. Would you not agree that there's some stress going on? I mean, if you're told, hey, there's going to be an annihilation of everything that you know about your life unless you do X, Y, and Z, right? How many of you would agree that living through the pandemic has been a stressful time? Not everybody, okay. I found it stressful. Lots of different things to have to learn and adjust to, right? So anyway, how do you find peace of mind in those difficult times? And what can we learn from the story of Noah and the ark? Well, in our metaphysical approach to the Bible, we look at key characters and we try to understand maybe what the root meaning of the names might be and what they might represent and what sort of archetypical story they might be suggesting about us. And so I just want to pull out a few of the elements here. And the first is Noah. And the name Noah is known to mean rest, calm, or peace. Rest, calm, or peace. And the ark. When I think of the ark, what could the ark represent in us? To me, the ark represents in us our consciousness, where we choose to dwell, where we choose to go. And we can go to a crazy place in our mind, a very fearful place in our mind, or we can go to a different state in our mind, a different place in consciousness. We have the element of the number 40. And in the Bible, there is significance to the numbers that are used, not meant to be taken literally, but meant to be understood symbolically. And the number 40 is often used to symbolically represent the idea of enough, to represent the idea of completion, that something took place long enough until it was finished, until it was done. So it's not a literal 40 days and 40 nights, but that something happened until a cycle of completion was reached. And then, of course, the rain. The rain. When I think of rain, I can't help but think of this whole idea of cleansing and purification, right? You know, some of us can actually sense and smell the air is different when the rain is about to come. And then can you also sense and smell the difference when after a fresh rain, right? It's like there's this, as if nature itself is exhaling with us. And so in these elements, I think we can pull apart some things that we can remember for ourselves about when we're in one of those times in our lives that seem really dark, perhaps, or frightening or confusing. We're uncertain. We're not sure what to do. What it suggests to me is that when one is centered and peaceful, one is able to make it through pretty much anything. When one is centered and peaceful, one can make it through pretty much anything. When one is centered and peaceful. So how do we do that? There are 5 thoughts that come to me as I think about this story and the elements of it. And the first is this: the importance of our imagination. I think in the story, allegorically, the words that God saw or felt, that the imagination of man's heart was what? Was evil, was bad, was negative. And that's what he wanted to what in the story? Wipe out. Wow, is that powerful? I mean, think about that symbolically for a moment. The significance of that. In many ways, that's metaphysics 101. Thoughts held in mind produce in the outer after their kind. That it really does matter. We decorate the ark. Chaotically or joyfully or fearfully or shamefully. We decorate the ark, if you will, our consciousness by the imaginations of our heart, the thoughts that we think. I can remember the power I felt the first time my minister really painted clearly for me how powerful one's imagination is. And I won't share all the stories, but he shared any number of stories and pieces of research about the effectiveness of deliberately using one's mind toward the end that one wants to achieve. To literally practice holding in one's mind's eye, gently but steadily, what one wants to bring forth. I can remember hearing this when I was a very young person. I found unity when I was still either just graduating from high school or right after high school. And I can remember wanting to put what he was telling me to the test. Did this really work? Did it really work that if I really practiced holding something in my mind, that it could be effective? And at that point in my life, one of the things that mattered so much to me was getting better and better at ice skating. That was my hobby. That was my love. And I thought, what better place to practice this power of the imagination than visualizing myself being able to do particular moves? Instead of visualizing, oh my God, it could fall. Oh my gosh, I could see where I wouldn't land that. To actually literally practice it. And it was so practical because my parents had a limited amount of money that they could direct toward my actual on the ice time. And I remember sitting like you're sitting and hearing what Bob Stevens said and thinking, wow, I wonder if this could work. And it did make a difference. It did. So I think for us as adults, dealing with whatever it is that you're dealing with in your life that maybe is stressful. One of the things we tend to do when we're dealing with stressful things is if we have not trained the mind otherwise, we tend to get very visually skillful at imagining the worst possible thing that could happen. Anybody relate to that? And so a very underused aspect of our being is the aspect of deliberately thinking, with the emphasis on the word deliberate. Deliberately thinking, deliberately holding in mind the image, the feeling, the sense of whatever you want to be bringing forth. To direct our imagination only to what we want to experience. In the book, Seeds of Greatness by Dennis Waitley, he has a little segment in there where he's reflecting on a study that was done at Stanford University, and this is what he writes about that. One of the most critical aspects of human development that we need to understand is the influence of repeated viewing, put in quotes, repeated viewing, and repeated verbalizing in shaping our future. The information goes in harmlessly, almost unnoticed on a daily basis, but we don't react to it until later when we aren't able to realize the basis for our reactions. So if we are habitually imagining the worst possible scenario, if that's the real that's playing in our minds, there comes a time then where that becomes so ingrained that we are operating from that mindset without even realizing that we are. And so this idea of deliberately practicing is what helps us to change that. What might it look like? It might look like something as simple as setting aside 3, 4, 5 minutes a day and closing your eyes and really picturing as best you can what it is that you want to bring forth and staying with it, not like this, but staying with this with a steadiness and then letting it go and repeating that on a consistent basis. Some of my favorite words from Paul were in his letter to the Philippians. He wrote, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there be any excellence, if there be any praise, think on these things." Think on these things. Second idea is to make sure you're all prayed up. Say that with me. Make sure you're all prayed up. We've all heard the phrase to be all paid up. In many ways, I think it's far more important that we are all prayed up. There's a story of Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, who used to do a lot of personal correspondence with people who would write into Unity for prayer. And during the Great Depression, the Fillmores had, right before the Depression, had bought Unity Village land and were starting to build a Unity Village and were part of the way through, and the Depression hit. And everything had to stop and they had to go back to the other headquarters that they had. And it was a real test of their faith during that time. And there's a story that a woman came to Myrtle and said, "We'd better pray that the money doesn't run out." And Myrtle's answer was, "No, we'd better pray that our faith doesn't run out." That our faith doesn't run out. To make sure you're all prayed up, remember, if you remember the story of Noah and the ark, Noah built the ark before the rain came. We want to build our consciousness before the rain comes, which means we don't want the doctor to say, "I've done everything I can. All that's left is to pray." We don't want that. We want to do that on the front end. We want prayer. We want prayer to be our first response, not our last resort. Let me say that again. We want prayer to be our first response, not our last resort. Paul taught us that we were to pray without ceasing. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to sit in your prayer chair all day long and just pray in your prayer chair. What does it mean? It means to cultivate your thinking, to raise it to the highest level possible. Charles Fillmore, and I believe Emerson, or maybe I've gotten them backwards, spoke of prayer as being the highest form of thought, the highest elevation of the energy of thought. In Unity, we have a very specific kind of prayer. Our kind of prayer is affirmative. Our kind of prayer is built on a foundation of spiritual truth, which means it's not anchored in appearances, and we're not praying to a distant God. We're praying from the awareness of the oneness of our connection with that God, with that presence. And we are using prayer not to change God, but to restructure our thinking. You may or may not be aware of this, that the only thing that's recorded that the disciples, the followers of Jesus, asked Jesus to teach them was prayer. And if we think about what's recorded in the Gospels, there were some other pretty, quote-unquote, miraculous things that are said to have been done. And yet the Gospel writers seem to point out that the only thing that the disciples asked Jesus to teach them how to do was to pray. Why? Maybe they had a moment of enlightenment. They were a motley sort of group and had their own share of problems. But it seems to me that in the moment of that request, that they were onto something. They must have somehow connected the dots. That here's this teacher of consciousness, my words, not theirs, obviously, that is having an effect on people. And he seems to do this thing called prayer. And he seems to do it maybe a little bit differently than the ritualistic prayer that they were taught. Maybe that's a piece of his magic or his success. So to be all prayed up, to make prayer, even if you can only start with a few minutes of a day, a consistent practice. A third idea, don't sweat the small stuff. You've heard that before. Has anybody mastered it? I haven't mastered it yet. There's still small stuff that gets the best of me. Raise your hand if you can relate to that. Yeah. And then I get so frustrated because I know better, but I'm not doing as well as I want to do. We were having an issue with an appliance we bought that has a part that's not working. And the number of phone calls and emails I've had to make to try to get this thing fixed has been ridiculous. And yet there's a part of me that's watched me totally surrender my inner peace to an igniter switch for a dryer. It's probably all of $45, but it happens to be a dryer located 400 miles away and 100 miles from the nearest appliance person. But still, it doesn't matter. It's a first world problem, and I know it. But I still go, how come I let that get the best of me? Can you relate? And so what I try to do is at least shorten the amount of time it gets the best of me and not let it go so deep, because I haven't perfected it yet. But I know that any incremental change is better than not trying at all. And things like simply asking myself, in 5 minutes, will this matter? And the lower part of me says, yes, in 5 minutes it will. In 5 days, will it matter? Yes, in 5 days it will, because it's been more than 2 weeks. In 5 months, will it matter? Well, maybe not. In 5 years, will it matter? Not at all, right? So we live in the arc of our consciousness. Are you with me? We live in the arc of our consciousness. Nobody is in there thinking our thoughts but us. Unfortunately, I wish we could blame it on someone else. The voice may sound like the voice of your mother or your father or your whatever, but ultimately, it's still you, right? And so being all prayed up, having tools that we use when it seems like the rain is just coming and nothing's going the way that we want it to call ourselves up, quite literally, and remind ourselves, I'm not going to sweat this. In 5 months, 5 years, it's not going to make a difference. Fourth idea, and I'm going to wrap this up very quickly. There's just two more points I want to share with you. Fourth idea is to put what's happening in perspective. And that really relates to what I was just speaking about a moment ago. One of the most powerful concepts I learned as a result of the experience that John and I had in India a lot of years ago now was the idea of first world problems and really, really putting things in perspective. And when feeling stressed about something or feeling frightened about something or worried about something, to try to get some perspective around it, to step back, to take a wider angle view of it, to ask of myself, have I ever been in a place like this before? Has it ever felt this way before? Have I made it through? Obviously, or I wouldn't be asking myself these questions, right? Have I made it through? Yes, I have. Has anybody else ever been through something like this before? Yes, they have. If the very worst thing that happened, could I make it through? Probably. Perspective is an underrated or perhaps even unacknowledged spiritual practice to put the stuff in your life in perspective. And the last is to take good care of yourself. Say that with me. To take good care of yourself. In metaphysics and unity and new thought, we look at our body as the temple of the living God. We take those words to heart, that we are the temple of the living God, and that whatever it is that we are dealing with in our lives, if we don't take care of the we that is dealing with it, whatever the it is going to get the better of us. And so what is it that you need to remember to do for you to take care of you? What does that look like for you? And only you know if you're doing pretty well with that or not. And if you're not, don't beat yourself up for not doing well. But if you're not, stop and ask yourself, well, what's one thing, just one thing I could do within the next week that would take care of me? Maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's a massage. Maybe it's listening to some beautiful music. Maybe it's taking a bath. I don't know. But what's one thing you could do for you that would prove to you that you are taking care of yourself? So whatever else is happening in your life, you have the strongest, healthiest self to bring into play around that. Namaste.